All right, folks, welcome back. This is another episode of On and Off the Spectrum. I'm Dr. Estie Hess,
And I'm Dr. Ann Kirsch.
and we have the great pleasure tonight of meeting with Rabbi Robbi Tombosky. Robbi is the lead rabbi at the Young Professionals Minyan at Beth Jacob Congregation in Beverly Hills, California. And I will tell you that I think one of the reasons that I've been so impressed, Robbi, about you and why I shared my experience with Anne and wanted you on board is because the world, as we know it, is just so complex. And when you're a parent with a child with any kind of disability or just having children in general, trying to sort of ferret out all the different elements of a child's mental and physical health, your own mental and physical health to be in the best place possible is a daily challenge. I have been impressed when I've had the pleasure of coming and hearing you speak, how open and honest you are about your own mental health journey, your own health journey. And I wanted to kind of have Ann and I pick your brain a little bit about how you developed that openness, that philosophy, and just have a
Yes.
conversation with you
And
tonight.
I'd just add that, we've all been to lots of shuls around town, lots of temples, met lots of rabbis. I have, we all have. And it's unusual in my experience to find a rabbi who is so open about their own life journey, their emotions. It's more than just giving a sermon.
Well,
And so Esty had been telling me about you for a while. And so I'm delighted that you're here and we will pick your brain and we will ask you questions that I think will hopefully will enrich the people who are watching our program.
and may I add, not just in terms of the Jewish faith, but I think
Right.
clergy in general are not necessarily always known to be as open and forthcoming as I personally have found you to be. And so I would love to hear both of us in terms
Great.
of just how you came about that sense of openness.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
Yes.
Uh, Dr. Hess, I've known you for a long time and obviously a tremendous fan of yours. And Dr. Kirsch, a pleasure to be on this
Yes.
as well. So, I think when I started my rabbinic journey, which is going back now about 36 years or so, uh, I remember trying to figure out, like, what is, in a nutshell, the job of a rabbi? And so I
Mm.
started asking rabbis I knew and some who I respected, what is the job of a rabbi? And there were two answers that stuck in my head. One was from a rabbi who was very funny. His name was Rabbi Abba Perlmutter. And he said to me, the job of a rabbi is to comfort the agitated and to agitate the comfortable, which I found
Okay.
very
That's
funny.
pretty funny.
Okay.
Okay.
But the one that really stuck with me was another rabbi I spoke with. And he said, it's really simple. Being a rabbi is making the choice and making the commitment to be of service to those who choose to connect with you. The rest of it is commentary. So whether you're a great speaker or whether you're a great Torah scholar or whether you're pious and you're a sage, all of those things are lovely and fantastic endeavors. But it's really very simple. If you want to put the name rabbi in front of your name, that means when people are going through a challenge and they want to connect, and they want to find somebody that they can be honest and authentic with in a non-judgmental environment, that
Mm.
is your calling, and you are duty bound to show up day or night. It really doesn't matter, and be there for them. That stuck with me. That was something that really spoke to me as a human being, as a person. And I think I decided I wanted to become a rabbi that I would have liked to have had earlier in life when I really needed that rabbi to show up for me. And I didn't have that rabbi in my life as well. And along the journey and through lots of interactions, really came to understand that it's very difficult for a lot of people to find a safe place to connect, to be seen, to be heard, and to have the opportunity to explore and experience a lot of the challenges and pain that they go through in life. So everything I do in my speaking, in my engagement, how I work with the community is always an invitation to take me up on that. It's a delicate dance. It's an invitation. You can't just march into someone's life and ask them to open up and tell them all about themselves. So I try to make that invitation meaningful by taking the first step and being vulnerable and sharing the parts that I deal with and struggle with, so that they'll recognize that that's something that doesn't need to be hidden away. It's not something to be ashamed of. It's something that can be addressed. It's manageable, and it is something that allows us to truly grow in our spirituality.
Did you find that that was difficult when you started opening up and sharing those parts of yourself with whoever was asking you for guidance?
Yeah. So it was not difficult for me, and I'll tell you why. Because I grew up, maybe it was an era, maybe it was a different sensibility, but I grew up in a place where men don't cry and you
Mhm.
don't complain, and you have a problem, you bury it, you put it away, you move forward. The idea of processing trauma or even acknowledging trauma wasn't something natural to me. And so for me, I reached a point in my own health and mental health journey where in my probably late 20s, early 30s, felt like I was absolutely going to implode, and didn't know how to deal with so many feelings and emotions that I had never expressed and did not know how to healthily express them.
Mm.
Um, Several people in my life really helped me learn how to do that, learned how to be more demonstrative, learned how to be caring. And I learned from examples in my life to see that. And when I experienced it for myself, and I felt the sense of relief, of connection, of feeling okay, I knew that others must need that as well, and began the journey of developing those skills to be able to offer those to others as well. And once I started down that journey, it just felt so natural and authentic that I have never gone back. I'll tell you, I had a meeting today with somebody. It had nothing to do with my rabbi work. It was more engaged in a project and some consulting I was doing. And we spent an hour and we never got to the thing. It was all about the person opening up, telling me their life story, their challenges, their difficulties, what they're going through. And I find that often it's not very difficult to get people to open up if you just show up fully, you ask questions, you listen, you smile, you're approachable. And people are looking for that. There's very little place that people find that in their life. And if you can be that for somebody else, wow, that's a good day.
Well, what you're talking about, Robbie, is making a relationship. And I think that, for example, the type of model of intervention that I do with kids on the spectrum is called DIR floor time. And the essence is you have to be aware of a child's development and try not to aim too high or too low. You have to take into consideration all the underlying neurological pieces, but the most important piece is the relationship, because you are the Pied Piper. You have the potential to woo this child into the possibility of a relationship. And like this example that you just gave, it sometimes doesn't seem to matter about going ahead and talking about the thing, because it's the relationship that you're building.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sure you're aware the Surgeon General came out with a health alert about a year ago, and he identified a pandemic that's hitting our country that is far more deadly than COVID. In fact, this pandemic that he identifies, and the data is irrefutable, it's a 90-page study, uh, describes that this specific pandemic has the effect on health and on mortality of smoking 15 cigarettes a day, It increases the risk of premature death by 30%, cardiac arrest by 27%. And that is the pandemic of loneliness and isolation.
Exactly.
It
Yes.
is. So even though my work as a rabbi is obviously based in religion and spirituality, and in my case, Torah and Judaism, at the core of it, before you can get to any of that, for me, it's how are you connecting? Are you connecting with others, or do you feel isolated? And I'll tell you that you can be in a room, and you know this, with 100 people. You could have people all around you in your life. You could be in a house full of people and still feel lonely and isolation. And that is something that comes from the inside. That's the mental health. And I'll say that we have lots of families with children on the spectrum and in other areas of mental health. And there may be nothing more isolating to parents who feel like they are stepping outside of what other families are going through and can't relate or aren't understood. And so this that to me, it's that loneliness and isolation that we need to break. I try to start with a relationship with them and then help them broaden that circle out to relationship with others.
It's so interesting and important what you're saying. I think that as therapists, we understand about this issue about loneliness and about people feeling like they're surrounded, the terrible feeling of loneliness, of being surrounded by people, but not feel like they understand you or you can speak to them, tell them who you really are. And I think that COVID really opened the door. It was like a tidal wave, because what we saw were things that we know as therapists, you know, as a rabbi, but everyone was starting to see how lonely people were. The people that did very well, we know, were people who were already shut in and closed down in many ways. But for the general public and for children, it was a disaster. And it's a disaster that's still going on. And now we have an uptick. So it's going to, we're going to get hit again.
Well, to add to that, Anne, last week we spoke about the trials and tribulations and warnings associated with GPT chat, AI, and the underlying obsession with technology. And of course, we all have been at restaurants and seen a table where there's appears to be a mother and a father and a couple of kids, and everybody is collectively on phones and no one's talking to each other. And it is the most dramatic form of living behind walls. In fact, would you share that lovely story about the coffee? What you do sometimes at the coffee house to connect with people?
Yeah.
I thought that was just perfect.
So I have an insatiable need for connection. I wherever I am, it feeds my soul. So I started doing this a bit ago. So let's say on a Monday morning when I buy my coffee, I always turn to the person behind me. It's a low cost, low barrier way to be a philanthropist. And I simply say, hey, on Mondays, I have this thing where I like to buy the person behind me line a cup of coffee. Would you be okay if I purchased your cup of coffee? And 8 out of 10 times, they're like, wow, thank you so much. That would be unbelievable. And I do that. And then on Tuesday morning, I say, hey, I have this thing for Tuesday mornings, on Wednesday mornings. Grand total, it's maybe 20 or 30 bucks a week. And you'd be so shocked how that brightens someone's day. Actually, a couple weeks ago, I was in line and I turned to a gentleman and said, would you mind if I buy you a cup of coffee? And he was angry and offended. And I don't want a cup of coffee. Why would you buy me a cup of coffee? I can afford my own coffee. Just did not go well. I say, hey, no worries. My apologies. I paid for the coffee. He came pay for his coffee, but it still had impact because I'll tell you why. The person behind him turned to the person behind them who overheard the interaction and said, hey, the other guy was going to buy a guy a coffee. Would it be okay if I bought you your coffee?
Wow.
The chain continued. And I think, look, I think being able to demonstrate to other people um, a willingness and an ability to be vulnerable enough to connect with another person and to make an offering to another person, whether it goes well or it doesn't go well. As long as you can approach it with humor and grace and humility, there's an opportunity for connection. And my gosh, you don't know what another person is going through and what's one small kindness gesture could do to turn someone's entire day around.
Yeah.
You said something so powerful, the word vulnerability.
Mm.
I know that you and I spoke last evening in preparation for this evening's interview, and you mentioned about a family that's going through trials and tribulations and their vulnerability in terms of having a very ill child. But I've also been quite impressed about your openness about your own physical vulnerabilities. And in fact, this weekend, you are going to have a celebration at the end of the services where it's sort of entitled in a jokey way, but not, I didn't die weekend.
Not dead yet.
Not dead yet. And could you share that story? Because I think speaking about COVID and about vulnerability and resilience for families, I think this is very poignant.
Sure. I'll share the story and I'll tell you something very personal about it that I think will be insightful about my own challenge and growth with vulnerability. 4 years ago, I was in Las Vegas to officiate a wedding, and it was 2021, so it was sort of a big hit in COVID. And I took ill, and I was in my hotel room, and I was really sick for a couple of days. And I thought I had COVID, didn't want to go to a hospital off the strip in Vegas, and decided I would just ride it out. More and more ill, winding up in the emergency room. And right away, they took me in. It turned out that I had sepsis,
Mm.
that the sepsis had been very long. And if you don't treat sepsis within 36, 48 hours, it easily becomes irreversible. And my kidneys had already shut down. My liver had shut down. I had had a heart attack. And they basically said, in no uncertain terms, that they were going to do whatever they could, but there was a higher than not chance that I would not make it another 48 hours. And so if there was anybody I needed to talk to or anything I needed to say, this would be a good time. It was COVID, so nobody was really allowed in the hospital with me. I did convince my nurse to give me her phone, and with a blaring headache and somewhat of a foggy disposition, decided to write a letter to my kids. So I wrote them a letter, took me several hours. Wound up, there was about 10 points I wanted to share with them. And basically, if I'm not going to be there in the future, what are the things that I really want my kids to know? Some life lessons that I think would be most valuable for them, some dad advice. Gratefully, things turned around. I wound up, after 3 weeks, my kidney functions came back, my liver functions came back, wound up having a heart infection that had to be treated over the next couple of months. And I got sent home to be at home with an IV. And I am really good at being in charge of vulnerability. So planned vulnerability or strategic vulnerability, because
Yeah.
I'm choosing to share things that are good lessons. And so there's a construct for it. But here I was in a situation where everything had fallen apart. Couldn't work, couldn't get out of a chair for 3 months at home, was waiting to have open heart surgery, and had a choice of what to do and how do I approach that. And so I basically sent a text out and some emails out to my congregation and said, well, guys, here's the deal. Didn't die. Thank you for your prayers. I'm home. And illness is isolating, and my congregation is very young, and you may not have had a lot of experience with how to visit people with illness, how to deal with illness, what to say, what not to say. You avoid it because you're not sure what to do. So I said, my door is open. You can't say the wrong thing. Come in at any time. I want to hear from you. Text me, ask me questions. This is an opportunity for you guys to be here for me. And it was very uncomfortable for me because it was really about other people being there for me. Being a rabbi gives me the ability to be there for others on my terms. this was no terms. I can't do much. I need help. I need connection. And people showed up in droves, spent time, studied. And I always had this fear in the back of my head. What if everything utterly and completely fell apart? Who would be there? Who would show up? I just never knew. Like I relationships and I like to give, and there was this deep, connecting, gratifying part and a shift in my own self where I saw there was a community of people, family, friends, acquaintances who showed up for me in the most authentic, genuine, loving, kind ways. And I've never been the same since then. I know that I'm surrounded by love, and it's a different kind of vulnerability because it's not only vulnerability with a lesson that I can share as a teacher, but vulnerability where I could just be a human being and and allow things to know that if things fall apart, there are people around me. And I think that's what everybody needs to know. They just need to know that they've developed and they've invested in relationships that they can rely on.
That's so beautiful. It's really astonishing, I think, to hear you talk about asking for people to come in towards you. For
Yeah.
you to tell them what was going on is one part, but then for you to ask for them to come forward towards you is really beautiful, because my experience, and I think most people who have done things like this, is that people want to help. People want to. We see it all the time when there's an emergency, the fires in LA, or the riots years back. We see that when something happens, people show up. People who don't know one another will show up. And I love that idea. I love that they knew you a lot or a little, but they wanted to show up because they had your invitation. It's astonishing that you made that invitation. But I have to ask, how is your health now? How
I'm very grateful. I wound up having the open heart surgery and it went wonderful. And here I am 4 years out, and I'm healthier than I've ever been in my entire life. I have more energy than I've ever had in my entire life. So I feel beyond blessed. I feel grateful. I look at it as a gift, and this is all bonus time. And so for me, the entire focus of my day is how do I maximize that gift of time in ways that are meaningful to me and allow me to live into my purpose. And that's also a big part, I think, of how I approach my pulpit as a spiritual journey. Look, mental health, you and I know, is predicated on physical health and spiritual health because those things have deep impacts on how we're able to deal with things in a psychological perspective as well. And the spiritual health piece to me is really quite simple. It all comes down to purpose. If you have a sense of purpose from my lens, then you can find happiness. I think happiness is an outcome of purpose.
Mm.
I'm not
Well,
talking about clinical depression. I'm not talking about real, psychological needs that have to be addressed, and those will be also. But at the foundation, if you can find your sense of purpose and meaning for you, not what I say it is, but what does life mean to you? What are your gifts? What makes you feel expansive? What opens you up? What makes you feel alive? I think that's everything. In fact, there's this amazing quote by Howard Thurman, who was one of Martin Luther King's mentors. He was a huge influence on the civil rights movement.
yes.
And here's his quote. He said, "Don't ask what the world needs from you. Ask yourself, what makes you come alive and go do that? Because what the world needs now is people who are alive." So if I've done my job well, I help people feel more alive.
And I will share with you, being in your congregational audience, absolutely, that is the feeling, young and old. I think this is a huge message for the parents of who might feel vulnerable because they've just received a diagnosis of medical or psychiatric infirmment for either themselves or their children. and don't quite know where to turn, and to be able to say, I would like the world to come to me and to give support and not be isolated, to maintain and sustain it and enlarge those relationships. I think that's the takeaway message. I do have one more question before we end this wonderful, wonderful discussion. You said you took the time, several hours, to write this notes, this 10 points to your kids. What was the reaction, and have you had a chance to chat with them a couple of years after the fact, maybe on this anniversary date, about what messages they took, both obviously during the crises and then after, as they see their dad is recovered and not quite as ill, in fact has better energy, and this is all a gift of time and so forth. Where are your kids and their responses of their dad at this point?
That's a wonderful question. So I'm really close with all of my kids, and I talk to them every day, practically every day. And they call me, which is great because, I can chase them, but it's always gratifying when I hear from them and they're the ones reaching out. So it was interesting because I really was in a fog, and yet what came out of that letter, I read it again today. It's exactly what I would say today to them. So that was a gift. And they talk about it often. There's lessons in there. Middle of a day, they'll send me a text and say, "Just remembered lesson number 7," and they'll write about that.
Wow.
Son is a musician. I got my mayor. He's 22. He made a song out of one called "Dad Advice," and he kind of talks about it in the song. So it's been very instrumental, and I wrote them a book. I'm not publishing it. But I've taken each of those 10 points. So the book is the letter, each of the 10 points, and then sort of a chapter on each point. And I've been expanding that over a period of time, and it lives on a Google Doc that they have is accessible to them. And so I have no real interest or compunction of writing a book for the public, but this is sort of the framework that I write for them. So that has lived on, and that has become a bit of a family guiding conversation.
Oh, that's
That's a
wonderful.
great takeaway for people listening, that you don't have to be in a crisis in order to do that with your family,
I
your
believe it.
children, your family, your extended family. It's a beautiful thing.
Wow.
Well,
Beautiful.
this has been a beautiful evening.
Yes.
And I thank you. We both thank you so much. This is Dr. Estie Hess.
And Dr. Ann Kirsch, thanking you so much and welcoming you back to our next podcast.
Please, we are on and off the spectrum, and we've had a wonderful evening with Rabbi Robbi Tombosky. Rabbi, thank you for joining us this evening.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye.